We're going to be learning a bit about making a website with a grid layout. We're going to start off just by doing it with absolute positioning, but we're going to start doing things like making our website responsive later. But first we're just going to start off with fixed positioning of the HTML elements. The first thing you want to do is go into your web projects folder and create a new folder called layouts_projects. Inside layouts project, go ahead and create a few subfolders, one for CSS and one for images called IMG. We're going to be putting in 2 CSS files before we even type our first line of HTML. The first thing we're going to use is something called Normalize. So Normalize is used, it's very common now, and what it does is it resets that a lot of browsers try to do with HTML elements. So it kind of standardizes what everything looks like. So go to the Normalize website, click download. You can just press Control-A to copy everything, Control-C to copy. Go into Sublime Text, open up a new file, paste it, go to File, Save As. We'll go to the desktop, go to Web Projects, Layouts Project, CSS, save this as normalize.css. And that's all you need to do for that. We just need to link to it in the HTML file that we haven't made yet. Next, go to this website. So it's going to be at pastebin.com/K, lowercase f, CUUWYX. And this website contains a CSS file called grid.css. So go down to raw paste data. You can press Control-A to select everything, Control-C to copy, and then go into Sublime Text, Control-V to paste. And we're going to save this one as in the CSS folder as grid.css. I want to explain what a grid's doing. With modern layouts, the best way to go about doing things is to use some sort of grid. Now, you can make the grid yourself. It's just a way of kind of formatting your web pages and making sure you know what the scale of your page is. So you'll notice that we have a bunch of class definitions, like we have .grid1, .grid2, .grid3, and you'll notice that each of them simply has a width. And for the way you can think about grids is the way you can think about how a web page is laid out. A web page is going to be laid out using this grid using 12 columns. And it's an easy way to think about the width of your content. So for example, if you want in a particular row, if you want 3 elements and you want each of them to comprise 1/3 of the screen, you use the grid4 class because it's going to take up 4/12 of the columns. So that's what we're going to be using for now. Some other things about the grid class. We provide a gutter for it, so there's going to be a gutter on the right side and the bottom, so there's going to be a slight margin there. By default, everything will just float to the left of whatever container it's in, and the display is block. The container by default is going to have a width of 1,000 pixels, so that means that the content of the web page is just going to be 1,000 pixels wide, no matter how big the screen is. The alpha and omega class removes the left and right margin, and that'll probably come up when we're coding, so I'll show you then. And that's what we're going to be using. So you have to make sure that we have both the normalize and the grid.css CSS files available. So now let's make our HTML page. So in our head, we're going to need to, well, I'll just save this as an HTML just to get started. We'll save this as our index.html page. Okay. So we have our head, body, and then we need our HTML tags as well. Go ahead and indent these forward. We'll get this title of layouts. Then we just need to link to each of our CSS files. So we'll say href is CSS / the first one in is normalize.css. You generally want to call that one first. And the second one is grid dot or css slash grid dot css. All right. So let's start actually. Let's see what this looks like when we open it. Okay, nothing. Good. So we'll start off by putting everything in a div with an ID called container. I think we're looking for a div or a class. It might be a class called container. So we'll say class is container. So everything goes in there, and the reason we're doing that is because we want everything to be within that 1,000 pixels, the dimensions that we previously specified. I'm going to separate all these into their own sections. So we'll have our header. That's going to be where we put our logo and our navigation bar. After that, we'll have a couple sections. So we'll have section, and we'll give it an ID of section 1. So we'll be putting some stuff in there. We'll have section 2. Then we'll have footers as well. All right, so let's just put some things in here. Make sure it's happening. We're going to be deleting this text in a second. Just placeholder. Okay, so let's see what this looks like. So before doing anything else, go ahead and replace these links with these two lines. That's going to be what we want it to look like. And then click Save when you're done. Then go ahead and open in browser. Let's see what it looks like. So you'll notice that when we have a full screen, that the header, the section, and the footer are all over here, and there's this big gap. And that's because we have the width of the container that everything is in set to 1,000 pixels. So everything is going to be within a 1,000 pixel wide container, which is what we want. So let's start by constructing the header. The first thing we're going to do is assign a class to it, and it's going to be grid12. That's telling the HTML that we want it to be 1,000 pixels wide. So if we go back to the grid, you'll notice that applying the grid12 class does a couple things. It makes the width 1,000 pixels. That means it goes across the length of the entire container, and it does a little bit of margins, and it floats left. So let's put two things. Let's put two things in here. First, let's go ahead and put in a logo. So we'll put in a div with an ID logo. And we'll also put in a nav bar here. So put it in a nav tag. So for this div, for the logo, give this a class of grid4, so it's going to be about 1/3 of the container width. Then for the nav, give it class name grid8, so it's going to be 2/3 of the entire 12 columns of the container. So we're going to make this a list, just an unordered list. Okay, so what we want to do is we want to have 4 anchor tags and then put li, list element, inside of there. So for the hrefs, for now, we're not going to give them any real links. So as a placeholder, put in a hash symbol. And we'll just call this link 1. We'll call this link 2, call this link 3, and we'll call this link 4. And the idea is this is just going to be our nav bar. For now, we'll put in some placeholder text. Maybe we'll call this logo. Now if we open it, so you might notice that the navs end up being below the logo, and we want it to be on the side over here. And that's because sometimes, because of the way the margins are added, we're going to end up kicking something to the next line. So what you can do is you can add an additional class to nav called omega, and that will fix the problem. That removes the margin on the right, so that now they're going to end up being where we want it to be. Something else we can do is I wanted there to be a clear delineation between each of our sections. So for the header, we can also add a background color to the header. Now typically you wouldn't really want to do this, it's going to look a little silly, but for now, because I just want you to see how the sections are divided, it's going to make sense to do this. Go ahead and open a new file. We're going to save this as style.css, so save this in the CSS folder. And then use the header selector and then give it a background color of we'll do that. So then make sure you link to it as well. So style.css, open it. So now you'll notice that there's actually a very clear idea of where the header is located. Let's actually fix up this this list a little bit. So we can do that in the style. So some things we definitely want to do. We want to have them displayed inline. Is select li and change the display to inline. When we do that, now everything is horizontal. Some other things we can do is we can add some padding to the right so we can separate each of the links. Maybe about 50 pixels. Then we reload it. There we go, now they're all separated. Some other things we might want to do, we might want to just remove the underline, so we can say UL and then text decoration, none. So in your style.css, go ahead and use the A selector and then type text decoration none. Save it. When we open up our HTML file now the underlines will be removed from our links. Okay, and we'll fix that. We'll fix that up a little bit more later. So we'll go down to section 1. So in section 1, let's say we want 3 separate elements. We want one element to go about 1/3 of the way, another element to go about another 1/3 of the way. Let's just say we want 3 elements in the section and we want all of them to go along 1/3 of the width. So what we can do, we'll put this in a div called elements1. Let's go ahead and just copy and paste this, and we're going to make a div for element 2 and element 3 as well. Element 2, element 3. And for each of these, we're going to add different classes. So for the section, let's add a class of grid12 to have it extend across the entire span. Then make a class here called grid4. We want it to go across 1/3 of the way. We can add the same class, grid4, to the rest of our divs down here for element 2 and element 3. Okay, so it's not going to be obvious yet, but let's go ahead and add some content. So you can just type some lorem ipsum stuff in here, maybe in some paragraph tags. Then when you're doing that, you can copy and paste it. So we'll save it. So now notice that we have these three sections, but we wanted this one to be still on the same line. So what we can do is we can add the omega class to element 3. And then that removes the margin off the right, so now it's all in there. So now if we extend across the entire page, you'll notice that these sections take up a third of the width of the container. So now let's just go ahead and add some styling to it. So for element 1, let's go ahead and just change the background color. Change it to just blue or something. Make sure you put the hash symbol in front of element 1, it's an ID. We'll just copy and paste this, and we'll do the same thing for element 2 and element 3, except we'll give them different background colors. Change this to red, this one to gray. So now if we reload the page, now each of those sections is going to have their own background color. So we could do something similar for section 2. So imagine we want one section to go about halfway and the other section to go halfway. So we need two elements inside of section 2. So we'll need two sets of divs. The first one will be element 4, because we already made one for element 1 through 3. We'll make another div for element 5. We'll add some classes. So we'll add a class grid6 because we want it to go across the entire screen. And we'll add another class grid6 to element 5 because we want it to go halfway across. So if we reload this, we won't see anything yet because we haven't added anything. So we'll go ahead and add some lorem ipsum text. Go ahead and copy and paste after that. So same thing happened as before. Go ahead and add the so for this section, go ahead and make sure we add a class for grid6. We need to say that we want the section to go across the entire screen. Additionally, make sure that you add omega to element 5, the class omega. There we go, that did it. So then we'll just add some background colors to each of them. So for element 4 and element 5, so we'll say element 4 and element 5, and we'll make the background color green for element 4. We'll make it purple for element 5. Alright, so if we save that, so now we have these clearly defined sections, like that. Okay, then we can just make a footer after that. That doesn't have to be anything special. Inside some p tags, go ahead and type ncopy, that's the escape sequence for the copyright symbol, 2015, and your name. Save that. And we'll just give the footer color too. And we'll also make sure that it extends the entire way. So we'll say class grid 12. And we'll give that a background color. So now we're pretty much done the layout of our website. So let's go ahead and do things like add a logo to our site. And we're going to do that using Photoshop. So go ahead and open Photoshop Elements. And you want to click on Photo Editor. So first of all, let's figure out how big our logo needs to be. And it's going to be the height of this div. So if we inspect the element, we can see how big it is. And it looks like it is 60 pixels high. So let's go ahead and make a logo that's 60 pixels high. So we'll go to New, Blank File. We'll call this Logo. And change the height. We're going to look at it in terms of pixels. So that should be 60 high and 60 wide. Make the resolution a little bigger than 300, make it 600, should be good. Color mode, RGB color, and background contents transparent. So that's going to be really important, make sure your background color is transparent. Click OK. So we can just make a very simple logo here. If you click on the shape tool or click on the paint bucket. You can choose the background color, and that's going to be, choose like a blue color maybe. Then take a circle. We're going to make a white circle. Okay, so we'll choose a shape. So go ahead and pick a shape that you like. Photoshop Elements has a ton of shapes. Let's make it like an arrow. Okay. And go ahead and take the arrow and drag it on like that. Alright, so that's going to be our logo. So it's not the best logo I've ever seen, but it'll do. So go to File, Save As. Make sure you navigate to your Web Projects folder, the Layouts project, and in the IMG folder, save it as a JPEG. So logo.jpg should work. Okay. Now in your Sublime Text, go to the index, and where it says logo here, delete that and put in an image tag and source it from img/logo.jpg and give it alt text logo. So now if we did everything right, we should actually see a logo appear where it said logo before. So we just need an equal sign here. We'll save it, and there is our logo. Now one thing you might notice is that the logo is adding some extra padding that we don't really want. So if it's back to 60, it's going to be the size that we actually want it to be. So let's go ahead and make sure that it's not getting any extra padding from logo. So we're going to choose the div ID logo. So for logo, let's go ahead and say, we want the margin to be 0 pixels. And make the height 60 pixels, and then it's going to adjust. So now we actually have our logo over here. So we could do things like make this a link to our home page. That's pretty typical. We could start changing the links to something else. So if we go back into the index page, we can make this. Usually your image is the home link. So we'll make this like about us, menu, contact us. You can just get rid of like the fourth link. We probably don't need it. So now that you know a little bit about setting up a layout for a simple website with fixed proportions, you're going to be trying that out yourself.